Hi everyone, it's Cammy here. Thank you so much for listening to this week's Heart and Hand. If you happen to listen to the shows on the Apple, Android or Spotify platforms, could you please give Heart and Hand a follow on there? They may also ask you to write a wee review, and if you could write us a really good one, we would massively appreciate it. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Heart and Hand, the Rangers podcast. This is your extra show for the week and final one of the season, I am sad to say. So I had to pull out a big gun in order to be able to talk about this weekend's Scottish Cup final against Celtic at Hampden. And they don't come bigger than the boss, Mr. Davie Edgar. Davie, thank you very much for coming on extra this week.
Hi, Cammy. Yeah, no problem. Nice to be here.
Yeah, Davie, we've got a fair bit to cover in terms of the preview of this weekend's game, and we will come to that in short order, covering what's been mentioned at the press conference at Hampden earlier on today by Captain James Tavernier and obviously the manager, Philippe Clement. But most importantly, I think, David, we have to have a little chat around Saturday at 12 o'clock. Rangers will be unveiling the long-awaited Walter Smith statue positioned between the stadium and New Emerson House. Pictures are already starting to leak online that the statue has obviously been delivered. Everyone's really anxious to see it. And I think that it's going to be an incredibly poignant moment on Saturday at noon when the statue is unveiled, obviously in front of his wife Ethel, his sons, grandchildren, and obviously the masses of Rangers support who will be there, some obviously heading across to Hampden to watch the game. But personally, I can't wait to be able to get the opportunity to see it in the flesh. But yeah, very much a watermark moment, I think, in the commemoration of, certainly for you and I, in our lifetimes, the greatest Rangers manager.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it differs by generation, of course, and who you've seen. But in the same way that for us, Richard Gough is the captain, that Walter Smith is the gaffer, and that won't change in our lifetime. Hopefully, youngsters get their own version of that, Cammy, in the future, and I hope they do, to get somebody who so totally represented not only the club fantastically well in a professional sense, i.e. delivered trophies repeatedly, but represented a bit more than that about what we wanted our club to be, how we wanted it to conduct itself, and with the dignity that Walter always did, with the single-mindedness, the determination that Rangers should be number one when he was there, and just the way that he presented himself and his teams and his football club, because Walter was Rangers to the core, I think was inspirational. Really, there's no other word for it, and that is a big word, and I get it. But I remember years ago, one of our podders, Stuart McCall, turned to me just in Walter's second game in charge of Rangers again, and he said, I just feel when he's on the touchline, I just feel much more settled. And it was that feeling. That's what Walter brought. It's okay, he's got this. He's got control of this, he understands. And that didn't mean he was exempt from criticism. There was plenty of criticism at the time. There was times in the 90s in particular where people thought that he should have gone. But he always came through it, and he always delivered. That was the thing. Whenever you needed him to do it, he always brought you forward that trophy. What he did in his second spell was utterly remarkable, given everything that was going on around the club at the time and the budget constraints, etc. To deliver the continued success that he did was just phenomenal. And I think as well that a statue isn't just about the individual. And I know that might sound a little strange, but by that, what I mean is, although we are commemorating a great man and what he achieved at the club, I think what we're saying to future generations as they walk past it, because a statue will always start a conversation. The first time you take your son or daughter to Ibrox, who's that? Tell me the story about it. It helps to keep that history alive, to keep passing it on, but also it's a reminder of what the club should be, not just where we want it to go in terms of on the pitch, but the way that the club should be, really, the way it should operate, the way that Rangers should be as an institution. That's what that statue represents, over and above the fact that it is a very deserved celebration of, as I say, the greatest manager in my lifetime, and that will not change as far as I'm concerned, because Walter Smith will always be the man to me.
Yeah, and coming back to the man, we've been very privileged on this platform, David, to speak to a number of ex-players who obviously played under Walter. And so we've heard first-hand recollection of stories about him, of the gravitas that surrounded him, and probably, we know the peripheral stories, obviously, as we mentioned there, in terms of not just his history with Rangers, but, leaving the club and going to become an assistant manager at Old Trafford, not a gig that just your average person walks into, obviously, then to Everton, the Scotland national team, and then obviously coming back to Rangers, as you mentioned in there as well, to come back and really right what was pretty much a close to sinking ship. But those ex-players that we've spoken to, you and I have noticed a discernible change in their tone and their voice. A lot of it's, warm memories about a man who was, undoubtedly a father figure to them. There's absolutely, no one, I think, can contest that. And I think for a lot of those players, when they think about Walter, they think about all the fond memories. Now, we've seen the kind of hard shell of the man. Of course, we know that, but there was a uniquely comforting individual underneath that exterior who, for a lot of these players, some of whom I think very difficult to manage in terms of who they were as characters, right? And I think we'll probably guess quite accurately who I mean when I say that. But they just connected to him in a way that, even though their exposure to so many footballing greats from a managerial sphere, Walter was at the top. And that, for me, speaks so much about the man and who he was.
It does. The thing about Walter is that you wanted to impress him. He just had an authority and an aura around him that you wanted to impress him, and you're right, the players speak about that as well. And we've all heard the stories about Walter, the tough guy, and he could be when he wanted to be. But that alone wouldn't have fostered the sense of belief in the players, and more importantly, the desire to do it. I always go back to a quote Eamon Bannon made about the Dundee United side under Jim McLean, Cammy, that lost 5 cup finals. And he was asked about that, and he said, sometimes we'd be playing Rangers and I would see them, their players look around at Walter, and you could see them go, I need to do it for him. I'm going to give another 10%. And he said, and we never really had that, because although we all thought Jim was a wonderful manager, we didn't have that connection, that bond. He was a cold fella. And I think that's true of the greats, Walter Smith, Alex Ferguson. Players want to do it for themselves, but they wanted to do it for their guy. They didn't want to let them down. And that's not, you can't just engender that feeling with fear, right? That won't work. And I think that with Walter, it was a case of, you knew that he'd gone to bat for you as a player, and you wanted to make sure that you were delivering for him. So, yeah, I think that all of these factors were key in his management style. He did know the players that needed an arm in them. He did know the players that needed a kick up the backside. And he did know the players, by the way, just to leave, to let go, that they would deliver. So, yeah, he was excellent in his man management, and that was his key strength.
Yeah, and again, obviously, you mentioned about, setting the standard and making sure it was maintained. And again, we've heard from our friend Kevin Thompson, who obviously had a catch up with Walter, and Walter asked how he thought he was doing. He says, "Yeah, I think I've been doing okay." And Walter hit him straight back with, "Well, okay is not good enough at this club, son," and it's imprinted on him. So yeah, absolutely. And listen, I'm personally really looking forward to being able to go and see the statue. And yeah, I think it's going to be pretty emotional, if I'm being honest, Dave. I think it's certainly going to bring back some happy memories, but as always with these things, you do get the reminder that that person's not here any longer.
Yeah.
And that's always tough, but the happiness will outweigh the sadness for sure.
Yeah, I think so. It'll be very emotional for his family, who are lovely people. Been fortunate enough to spend a bit of time with Ethel and his sister Liz at various conventions over the years, and they are amazing people with great stories. And it'll be, Neil, his son, as well. So I hope that I know it'll be. I know it'll be very emotional for them, but I hope that it's also ultimately an enjoyable day, and and hopefully we can celebrate it with a Scottish Cup, which would be very fitting.
Well, moving on to the current Rangers manager, Philippe Clement, was at the press conference earlier today at Hampden with James Tavernier, playing his cards pretty close to his chest. I think it's fair to say, David, that he hasn't given away too much in terms of the team lineup. I think that is quite a promising approach for me. I know that through various different formats, we've all kind of been discussing what the lineup is likely to be on Saturday. Now, there are a few sound bites in there as well from both the manager and the captain about, we have to be switched on, we have to go for it, it's our final trophy of the season. There's a sentiment as an undertone. I think it's fair to say that there has been a disappointment in terms of how our league campaign has kind of come to a conclusion. I think for me, David, it's probably it feels a little bit different than the build-up to the last league game at Parkhead, because we weren't getting into that with any real confidence given our run of form, etc. Not a great result at Tynecastle, it has to be said, and I'm going to be honest, in what was effectively a bit of a dead rubber, but we could have used some positives from it in terms of being at least been able to come away with a win after being a goal down. The key point to this for me, and I'm keen to get your thoughts on this, is that firstly, and I don't say this glibly, I do not believe that this is a good Celtic team. I think that for me, across the course of the Old Firm League games this season, we have started poorly but finished strongly. Now, the key element to this for me is that irrespective of whatever the lineup is going to be on Saturday afternoon, we have to go out with confidence and we have to be able to go out with belief. It's going to be a frantic atmosphere for the first time, in a good wee while now. There will obviously be both sets of fans there, so it will be a cauldron. Please forgive me for using the cliche. We need to put all of that to one side, and we need to be focused on starting strongly. We need to put everything behind us in terms of what's happened within the last few weeks and months, if I'm being honest, and just focus on this one-off fixture and what it can mean to us. We'll talk about the resulting effects that it could mean for Philippe Clement in just a moment, but it has to be a Rangers team that believes in itself. And I think that that's going to be something that we're going to see within the kind of opening period of the game.
It will be. There's a few things there. Firstly, the build up to this has been quite quiet and subdued among Rangers fans, and I think it would be disingenuous if we were to pretend that it hasn't. Now, that doesn't mean that come Saturday, the battle fever won't have kicked in. We'll be firing all cylinders, and it's a one-off game between two sides that, as you say, the results have been close. They've just not fallen our way. Now, that's not bad luck, incidentally. I'm not making excuses. But there hasn't been any walkovers or any complete and utter doings, because you're right, this Celtic team is not as good as, say, the Celtic team of last season, for example. But it's been better than us, and unfortunately we have to concede that. I think a couple of things in terms of what's caused that mood is that, firstly, the relationship between this Rangers team and the support is broken, and a cup final win won't fix it, incidentally. That's why Philippe Clement is right to be talking about end of a cycle. It is exactly that. There's now too much water under the bridge. There's too many memories, and opinions are set. They will not change now. And therefore, you are, I think, in a loop as you can get into in a relationship where it just continues to feed in on itself. And I think that's where everyone is. So even if Rangers are to win the Cup with a spectacular performance and result, it won't change minds that players need to go. I don't think that's a possibility. And I think that from what Philippe Clement has said, that he recognises this. So there's that. Secondly, in terms of the matches, as you say, they have fallen into this pattern. Celtic start better, establish a lead, Rangers come back, but it's too late. We've seen it so often this season in all of these matches. And of course, it's no coincidence that Rangers have fallen behind in so many, I think 9 out of 10 of the last Old Firm games. That tells its own story. One of the reasons for this is that I think this Rangers side is a reactive side, and it's something that needs to change. If anyone saw the Europa League final this week, Atalanta versus Bayer Leverkusen, Bayer were by far the more fancied side going into it. But Atalanta just imposed themselves on the game from the start. They played their game, and in turn, that prevented Bayer Leverkusen from playing theirs. Not through fouling or spoiling the game or anything, just they were aggressive in tackles, they were pressing, they were first to the balls, they won their duels, they picked up the second ball, and they looked to get it forward. When they got the ball, they had one thing in their mind: is how can we get an attack going? And they just took command of the game and never let it go. And that is something that this Rangers team doesn't do enough, and it's not unique to Old Firm fixtures. This has happened a lot with this Rangers team. They've gone behind a lot and then we've come back, which, you can admire for a bit, I think. Well, at least we've got the mental strength to come back. Yeah, but that's a supply, if you like. That's a reserve that you should only have to tap into occasionally and not every week. And unfortunately, this Rangers team does. And as I say, I think it's because it is a reactive side. Now, why is it a reactive team? Is it a personality thing? Perhaps. Does that maybe explain why this Rangers team has performed better in Europe over the years than it has domestically, in terms of we've been able to go up against sides that were quite often acknowledged as being better or richer, and we've been able to adapt our tactics to win that particular one-off game? It could be. I don't know the reason why Rangers domestically are so often early on the back foot, start slowly, and then have to come back into a game. And we've seen it even, Cammy, in the last 2 games against Hearts and against Dundee, where Rangers have had to come back from deficits. So there is that factor. Celtic have taken advantage of it. Celtic are good starters quite often. And Rangers have to be very focused on doing that. Very, very focused on doing it. The problem is when you have a pattern within fixtures, and we do in this fixture, the pattern that we've just spoken about there, which is, Celtic... Rangers make early errors, Celtic establish a lead by a couple of goals, and then Rangers are right up against it, come back and don't quite have enough to get a victory or even a draw, in the 2 Parkhead games. And the problem is, if Celtic take the lead early, then everyone will just assume, oh, well, that's the same thing we've seen time after time. And that is the problem when you're locked in a pattern. And incidentally, that's one of the reasons why you need to make the changes, because you've got to break that pattern mentally within us as a support, never mind anyone else, that we feel that this is going to happen. So it's imperative that Rangers do get off to a good start. It's imperative, I think, for Rangers to take the lead. I think just to flip the script a bit, just to say this is different today. This is going to be a different game. And I think that if Rangers get the first goal, I'm pretty confident we can go on and get the victory. If Rangers don't get the first goal and Celtic do, then I do worry that we're just going to see a repetition, that everyone sort of accepts their role subconsciously of, right, well, we know what happens. Celtic go a couple of goals up and then we'll try and recover it in the second half. If that happens, then if it's exactly the same pattern as we've seen in every other game, you have to suggest we'll get the same result. So for me, it's imperative that Rangers come out of the blocks quickly, something they haven't managed to do in an Old Firm game this season, incidentally. Come out the block quickly, assuredly, aggressive, front foot. The nervy starts that we've seen in previous matches have cost us, and by the time that Rangers recovered, and as I say, I don't think this is just purely an Old Firm problem. I think Rangers are a very reactive side. I think Rangers are a side who sometimes, far too often, need to be sparked into action, and incidentally, that long term is something that absolutely has to change, and Philippe Clement has to change it. Whether it's down to, as I say, a personality thing, a psychological thing, or just a physical thing, that Rangers are not a dynamic team, I'm certainly willing to hear that argument, because I think this team does lack pace and dynamism. Then, that. But equally, Rangers have had chances in these matches to take the lead and haven't. That's where it needs to change. If Rangers take the lead early, I've got every confidence we will go on and win the cup, or at least even take the lead. If we don't, then it becomes a different match.
Yeah, and I think for me, one of the key elements to that has to be Cyril Dessers. And the reason why I'm going to talk about him specifically, just to kind of kick us off with some of the personnel we might come on to chat about, is when you mention that strong start, I think it's fair to say we've been mentioning on a number of pods, both here and obviously on our Patreon site as well, that we do know that Dessers, he doesn't. It's weird to kind of talk about. He really is an enigma. When you see some of the chances that he misses, some of the chances that he scores from, but he won't get as much of an opportunity to rectify an early mistake. For me, I've got to be able to see from him just probably just an attitude of, if I miss or fluff my lines, whatever happens, I know I'm going to get another chance. They won't be as many as they will against the other domestic opponents, of course, we understand that. But for me, if he does miss his first chance, it's not a case of, okay, that's it, the ball's burst. We need to be able to instill some confidence within him to say, look, keep your head up, keep doing work. And I think to his credit, he has done that. I think he's looking far more athletic now since the manager has come in. He does do a lot of work. He's defaulted into being our first choice striker through injuries and, lack of other options. But for me, he can play a key role in what has to happen here. And not just necessarily scoring the opening goal that you refer to, but even just being able to kind of create the space or create some chaos in amongst that Celtic defence that could open up for other players to be able to capitalise on. We throw back to Alfredo Morelos and obviously all of the things that were made about him in terms of, his goals against Celtic and various other things as well. That seemed to be a stick to hit him with for a long period. But Dessers, completely different type of player, but he can be useful in other areas. He needs to be able to come out and he has to be able to have a good game on Saturday. That, I think, is going to be key.
Yeah, I think for me, as you say, Dessers is a bit of an enigma in that he can do some brilliant things and he can do some awful things, and you never know what you're going to get, even within the course of a 90 minutes with him. And that is the frustration. I've heard some people say things like, well, Ali McCoy's missed a lot of chances. Yeah, but he took a lot of crucial ones. And that's where Dessers falls down at the moment. You need the guy who's going to win you matches. And that's where it's kind of fallen down a little bit for me. I don't think his link-up play is good enough. I don't think his hold-up play is good enough. And that is absolutely key in the formation that Rangers want to play, the 4-3-3 going forward. Your number 9 needs to be able to hold the ball up and bring people in, and I don't think that's Cyril Dessers' strength. He is excellent at finding space to get chances. It's not coincidence that when we played Silva through the middle, Silva didn't have as many chances. And I remember someone saying to me, I wish that we'd create the same amount of chances for Silva as we do for Dessers. And I said, well, it's not luck that Dessers gets them and Silva doesn't. It's Dessers' movement. He finds himself in those positions because he works to get himself into those positions, and he's very good at that. That's why he gets so many chances. But for me, I think you need him on Saturday in particular. His hold-up play's got to be better. If Rangers are trying to get an out ball and it's coming back, then that allows Celtic to build up the wave after wave of pressure, which they've done to good effect against not just us, unfortunately, but against other sides, that eventually you know that sense of a goal's coming here. We saw it in the last match at Parkhead, and that is, of course, what happened. So I think that the front line in particular have got to be better at holding the ball up and allowing the team to get up 40, 50 yards, because if we are penned back early on, the opening 20, in our defensive third, then the chances of conceding are clearly much higher.
And also, it's going to be interesting in terms of the kind of main focus area. Obviously, will be the midfield. John Lundstrom is obviously back in contention for this, having served his ban. I'm keen to kind of get your thoughts on his potential inclusion. For me, David, I always try and think the best in people, right? It's just who I want to try and be as a person. My hope is that John Lundstrom has learned a lesson from his diabolical display at Parkhead. he has the opportunity now. He's likely going to be leaving Rangers in the summer. I think, there's certainly a lot of talk about that, potential moves to abroad, etc. But does he now have an opportunity which you feel he can grasp in terms of making amends for that display at Parkhead and just taking this opportunity, like a few of them, to potentially leave Rangers on a high with a Scottish Cup and League Cup double?
Well, we'll have to hope so, because I do think that the manager will play him. I wouldn't, to be honest, not simply because of that performance at Parkhead, although it's clearly got to be a factor, but also just simply because I don't think he's performed particularly well in all four matches. I don't think he's mobile enough, and I think Celtic's midfield take advantage of that. But I could understand the argument of, well, who else? Because nobody's really came in. Raskin did a bit better at Parkhead when he came on, but then last week against Hearts, the midfield was wide open. So I could absolutely understand why the manager might feel that he should turn to Lundstram. My problem is that Lundstram, I don't think, has played well for the past 2 months. After a really good spell, I'm not going to try and rewrite history. He was performing really well for the first few months under Philippe Clement, but his form, I think, nosedived. And yeah, I don't think many Rangers fans, certainly the ones I've spoken to, are all that keen on him starting. So if the manager starts him, he will get criticised if we don't win the game. It will be something that's used as a stick to beat him. He'll get criticised if we don't win the game anyway, right? I mean, so it doesn't matter. But I think that will be one that's used to go against them. For me, I think that, as I say, Lundstram in general has been fine domestically, but it was actually against Benfica that I started to worry, where I thought he's not at this physical level, and the games against Celtic. Lundstram has been fine most of this season against the rest of the SPFL. But I think in that position for the bigger games, we need better. We need guys who can dominate matches in bigger matches. So I'm not upset that he's leaving. If he comes in on Saturday, then yeah, he absolutely has to deliver. One, for his own legacy, but two, I think he owes the Rangers support, and more importantly, from a professional football point of view, I think he owes his teammates after that performance at Parkhead, where the own goal wasn't great. It wasn't bad luck, but it was bad play. But that can happen. But the red card, I thought, was scandalous. That was totally selling the jerseys. So if he does come in, as I say, not only for the fans, but for the rest of the people in the dressing room, I think he owes them a performance.
Yeah, and I think, for Raskin coming in, as you say, he's obviously to step in for Lundstram coming back, and he's been left out in the cold a little bit. He's had injuries. I think that there's a pro and con to Raskin playing for me if he was to go in that way, where I think he does provide an energy, and I think that's been important because Lundstram has looked sluggish. I think some of the mistakes that you've mentioned there, not just in the Old Firm game, but as far back as Benfica. And I remember other performances where we might have been able to get a win or we've got a result, but I still see just a lack of energy from Lundstram. And listen, to an extent, I don't blame him for that. There's plenty of players within that team who have played a lot of football. He's not getting younger. We understand this. The flip side of being able to include Raskin in it is that I just don't know how much I can trust them to be able to try and perform within that size of game, given he's just been brought back into the squad, or back into the start 11, I should say. It's a coin toss because of whether or not you feel when you assess that player, which obviously the manager and his team will have been looking at everyone across the course of this week, is to be able to say, look, mentally, can you handle this? Can you play the game that I need you to play, in the game that I know that you're capable of playing, with the energy levels that I need? Because we will need to be able to sit at times, but when we counter attack, we need to be able to try and move at pace. That's been a huge problem at times, and that's the kind of thing that I think Celtic can use to their benefit, is the fact that they probably don't feel that us moving forward with the ball is clinical enough. We know that that's been an issue. Raskin, for me, he can turn, he can be able to do those kind of things. I've seen John Lundstram do, but there is obviously that huge question mark around whether or not this is, I don't know, a game too soon for him. Would we have been able to try and play him a little bit more frequently had we been able to give John Lundstram 60 minutes a game, bring him on for the last 30, whatever. It's just
legit
tough.
It's legit to say that him and Tavernier, for example, have played too much football. I think there was a stat the other day that in the past 3 seasons, James Tavernier's played 170 matches. By comparison, guys in his position at other clubs, big clubs, have played around about 130. And I think it's showing, because I think that with footballers, it's less about age to me than miles on the clock. You know, that I think you've just got a finite amount in you before you lose a step. And I think that's what's happened to both of them. And Lundstram has looked very tired when he's played, and I think has looked not only slow in body, but slow in mind, which is, you know, a sign of kind of mental fatigue, really. So hopefully, if he does come in after having a break, I mean, for me personally, I'd be playing Sterling in there, because I think he's got mobility and a physicality that none of our other midfielders have. I also think he's got a sense of danger, you know, coming from being a defender in there. I think he's shown that when the rare times he's played midfield, but the manager hasn't played him in midfield very often. So, you know, maybe I'm seeing something that isn't there. But for me, I would have Sterling in there, which would allow you to then go. The other thing that we can't do in the middle of the park is go with Lawrence, because he just simply physically isn't capable of playing in these matches. Off the bench, he can make an impact, but as we've seen in his last 2 Old Firm performances, the game has totally passed him by, because he simply does not have the mobility to keep up with the Celtic midfield.
I have got, and I think you're right, because I think what may happen will be that he may play Sterling on the right-hand side. There could be an element of that's protection for James Tavernier, which I think lends into another question of, as you've rightly said, he's played a lot of football. I feel that it's not in any way an effective strategy if you have to protect another player rather than just, can you exclude him? But we can't. We just know we can't now.
See on that, right? I know that there is no chance that James Tavernier isn't playing. But if you need to play someone in front of him to protect him because you're worried about defensively, then play the guy who you think would be a better defender, i.e. Sterling, in there, and play McCausland, because we're sacrificing an attacker otherwise to do that. But it's not going to happen. So I think you're right. I think Sterling will play on the right to counter that. However, what concerns me is that if you look at Maeda against Tavernier on a one-on-one, if you look at last week, the goal, the second goal that Hearts scored, having another player there wouldn't have helped. They were one-on-ones. And therefore, Sterling being slightly in front of him is not going to help that, unless he can always prevent a one-on-one, which is virtually impossible over the course of 90 minutes. So it is an area of concern, there's no doubt about it. It is a worry. And it's one absolutely Celtic will be trying to take advantage of. There's no doubt about that. And it's something that we will have to be aware of.
Another player who I think is certainly worthy of conversation in terms of his potential involvement with Todd Cantwell. Cantwell scored a great goal at Tynecastle. So did the aforementioned Ross McCausland as well. So I'm very much hoping that we see McCausland involved within that, because I definitely think that this is great experience for him, and I think he's playing well enough to be able to merit inclusion. However, Cantwell's an odd one for me when we come into Celtic games. It's not a game where, you know, it's great if you're 2-0 up and, you know, you can bring in some player with a degree of flair, but this is about industry for me when we go through the middle of the park. Does Todd Cantwell come into your team for Saturday?
No. As I say, if it was me, I'd be going with a tight midfield 3 of Sterling, Raskan and Diamandi in there, to be honest, if it was me, because I think we need to do something different. And I wouldn't be playing Cantwell or Lawrence. If the manager decides, though, that he does want a number 10, then yes, it has to be Cantwell for the reasons I mentioned about Lawrence. Cantwell does have ability, a lot of ability. The issue can be that he can flit in and out of a game. He's a slow starter. I mean, I don't think there's much doubt that most of his better work takes place late in the half or into the second half. So those are concerns for me. Me personally, as I say, I would go with a tight midfield 3 with, as I say, the 3 guys I've mentioned there. But I don't think the manager will. I think you'll probably see a midfield of Lundstram, Diamandi and Cantwell. I think that he will have learned about Lawrence in these games. He has to have, because, as I say, the two games have completely passed him by. And that's not to say, by the way, Lawrence can't come off the bench, as he's shown, come off the bench and have an impact, a positive impact, but you save him for that. Therefore, as I say, if you're going with the more traditional number 10 type, then yeah, for me, it would be Cantwell.
Yeah, I mean, I agree in terms of being able to try and play the tight mids. If it's going to be an either or of Lundstrom or Raskin or Diamande, potentially Stelling in there, and playing Ross McCausland on the right-hand side of the front three, I think that can give us some scope. I don't think Greg Taylor's a good fullback. I think that if you run at him, I think you'll get some joy. We've seen previously where we've been able to see Tavernier being able to progress with that, but I think he has to contain Maeda, so I think that'll be part of the thinking.
I do think, though, if you've got Sterling in midfield on the right side of it, he can still offer the way Ryan Jack used to.
Yeah.
When Rangers were successful, he used to support Tavernier. So I still think you have that added layer of protection, but as you say, it allows you another attacker in Ross McCausland, who's on form, incidentally, and confident, and not a lot of Rangers players are both of those things at the moment. So yeah, I would agree. I thought that Sima in the 3-3 game gave Taylor a torrid time when he was on. So I think that is an area that we have to attack as well. And that's what I mean of being reactive all the time. We need to we know what they can do to hurt us, but what can we do to hurt them? And that's why I think you look at, right, well, what's our best method of doing that?
Yeah, I mean, Sima, I think will feature, but I don't think he'll start. I think it's fair to say. Again, just because he's been able to try and come back in. Silva on the left-hand side, I think I was impressed with him at Parkhead, David, I'm going to be honest. Furious with him at times at Ibrox in the Old Firm game prior to that because of the theatrics. He absolutely cut all that out at Parkhead for whatever reason. They obviously feel like as if, they want to target him, with the jeers and the boos, etc., because of what happened at Ibrox. But I think he gives as good as he gets against Alistair Johnson. And Alistair Johnson's played well against us in the past, but I thought at Parkhead, Silva did very well taking the game to him. Same as you're saying before, it's about being able to try and run at him and being able to try and penetrate as best you possibly can. Silva will not be here next season, I think, for a number of different reasons. However, again, from that perspective, he does look like as if he's had a growth of confidence. He is capable of producing things. And I think that, as you've mentioned before with Dessers, if he's able to create pockets of space, even if it's pulling players with him or whatever, and creating some space for Silva, I think for me that's just pretty much a gimme. I think he has to play Silva as well.
I think he will, yeah, and I think you're right. I think Silva played Johnston pretty well in the last game. What you're hoping for is, for a guy who will be seeking a move in the summer, it won't be to us, that, look, this is quite a big stage, so go out there and perform on it. And you have to hope that he does deliver. And again, in terms of, just for his own career, if he was to go out there and produce a match-winning performance, then it could make a big difference to where he lands up at next season. And yeah, I think he will start, and I agree with you. I think we will see Sima at some point, though.
And I think, kind of just rounding the team off as well, the centre-half pairing, I would select... assuming that he can play the full 90, would be Liam Balogun and John Souttar.
I don't think Souttar will make it.
I don't know if Souttar will. If he was available, then I would. I think then at this stage we're talking about potentially Balogun and Ben Davies. It's disappointing because actually John Souttar for me has always been a good siege defender. I was rewatching the Scottish Cup final against Hearts and actually played really well in that game against us. Obviously, we were not long after Seville at that point, and he actually played really well within that game. I think he can deal with some of those kind of things. I think you're right. I don't think if he makes it, then we're going to have to go with Balogun and Davies. It's no disrespect to Leon King, because as we've spoken about before, King hasn't been playing there for the B team. He's played kind of a little bit further forward, but this is a huge game for Leon King as well. If he was to play, I just wasn't overly impressed with what I saw with him previously. I think he's going to have to default potentially to Balogun and Davies. The thing for me with this, right, is we know it's a long-standing conversation that we haven't seen enough from our centre-halves as a threat at set pieces. But Balogun can be involved within some of that stuff. Davies, for me, I think, I had some concerns about him before when he kind of first came through into the team. Obviously, he wasn't getting selected for a good wee while. He has looked better. He's looked better in the areas where I thought he had concerns. Positionally, I thought at times he just didn't cover himself in glory. I thought he struggled when he was under pressure at certain points. That has got better. So we're not certainly at a crisis point in terms of what we pick for our centre-halves, but we have to be able to put a partnership in there that just controls everything that happens there. If your midfielder is not tracking a man, let them know about it, because that's where Celtic have got joy from us in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, if fit, it's Balogun and Davis. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Leon King, and I feel for Leon King, because I don't think we've served Leon King particularly well over the last couple of seasons. He was tossed in, very difficult situation, playing next to James Sand last year, at a very poor time for the team, out the squad, and then basically doesn't play for the best part of 18 months because the B team hardly play any fixtures. And then chucked back in now, where he hasn't been playing even in those rare sporadic appearances. This is where we've got to get better at the loan system. If Leon King was going to sit on the bench for 6 months, he should have been out on loan somewhere. And I think that he looks like a guy who's short on confidence and not quite sure where he's supposed to be at, and that's because he's not playing regularly. So I do feel sorry for him, but I think it's massive if we can get Balogun back for it.
Yeah, and I think just kind of rounding the team off as well, left back has to be Ridvan Yilmaz for me, David. James Forrest has hit a little bit of a purple patch. It's probably put him back into the contention for the Scotland team going to the Euros. He's got pace. Everybody knows that, but James Forrest, he needs someone to be able to try and deal with that. But also, when he has to do the legwork going back the way as well, Ridvan can get forward with the ball. I think he's a bright and positive player. Borna, we know, will obviously be leaving. I'm not going to put at Borna Barisic's door that he's checked out already. I don't think that's a fair accusation to make. Yilmaz, for me, however, is a more productive option at the moment, because I think that he gives us more going forward and going back than Borna Barisic does at the moment. There's obviously the question around if Barisic was to play, how he reacts to the fixture, because I know that he again has not turned up in certain games. We all remember that. I think it has to be Yilmaz for me in terms of just doing what we said before, just that positive start, that controlled start, and just not getting phased by the occasion. And for me, Yilmaz can do that.
Yeah, I agree. I think Yilmaz, if it will play. I don't think there's any doubt about that. So yeah, I think he'll start.
Well, we've kind of covered the team from front to back. You mentioned something earlier on, Dave, which I think is really interesting, because I'm sure you're in the same space as I am at the moment. We're not quite yet in the battle fever yet. It almost feels like as if we're at this kind of point where we just want the season to be done, and we start doing the rebuild and we start looking at whatever happens. Because I agree with you, by the way, earlier on, if we win the Scottish Cup and let's say we win 5-0, the conversation doesn't change. The moves and the transfers and the reshape that has to happen will still continue to happen. If we were to win it, fantastic. Enjoy your Saturday. As of Monday, the work will start. Can the fans get themselves into a space where they need to be able to try and turn up for the team, even though, as you mentioned earlier on, there has been that disconnect? We need to be able to lend our voice into that again, like I say, because it will be one of the rare fixtures of season where both fans will be in the ground. We have to be able to try and get ourselves motivated for within that. Now, I'll make a confession. Here in the pod, I've already started going down some of the YouTube rabbit holes. I started it last night. I'm going to do it again tonight, and I dare say on Friday, maybe even if I get up early enough on Saturday morning. So it's going to start to build, but we really have to be able to get into a space where we say, look, let's do everything we can as a support to be able to get this trophy secured and back to Ibrox. Because the most important thing for me, I think, is finish the season on a high. Do it for a support that's followed you everywhere across the course of this season, seen some real dirge in terms of performances, seen an upturn, and then obviously it just was a step too far for us in terms of the league. But we have to be able to try and just show whatever we can to be able to try and get behind these players within that atmosphere.
Yeah, I've zero doubt about that. I think the fans will. I don't think that's even a concern, to be honest. I know that that'll be the case come Saturday. So, no, I've got no issues with that. But you're right, it doesn't change anything. It doesn't change what needs to be done, whether we win it, whether we lose it. Nothing changes regardless, because the changes that Rangers need to make are deeper than a one-off match. And I think that the changes Rangers need to make have not come about overnight. They've not come about because of the last 6 weeks, and anyone who maybe tries to kid themselves of that, although as I say, Philippe Clement doesn't seem to be, would be fooling themselves. It's not just that the fans are disappointed, it's regular disappointment. It's the fact that it's happened so often, so many times in the same way. And that, as I say, we're locked in this cycle with these players. So the only way you change that is by raggedly changing the squad and instilling a new mentality into that dressing room. So yeah, regardless of whether or not we win on Saturday, I sincerely hope we do, obviously. And I would have a very fun night if we do, but it will be that. It'll be great. We've won the cup. What's next?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, that will do us on Extra for this season. David will obviously be back on Monday with the flagship to unpack whatever happens across the course of this weekend. Before I do my usual wrap-up, I would just like to also wish the Rangers women's team the very best of luck, David, for their Scottish Cup final. We're back to Hampden on Sunday as the Rangers women take on Hearts. Huge disappointment in a last-minute winner for Celtic to just take the league away from us. But 2 Scottish Cup finals for both Rangers teams across the course of this weekend. I'm hoping that we can get 2 for 2.
Yeah, exactly the same. It would be great if we could go in and end the season with 2 cup wins, and just give us a bit of a platform for the summer. But the key thing is just make sure that you go out there and that you don't leave the field with any regrets. And the manager has spoken about there's been regrets this season. So for us, it's learn. You've had plenty of examples on what to do and what not to do. Take those examples into the game, deliver everything you can for 90 or 120 minutes, whatever it is, and bring the cup home.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll do a little shout out for our very good friend Stevie Clifford and 4 Lads Had a Dream. They're doing a little bit of a Old Firm preview as well. Please jump over to his socials to be able to go and check that out as well. Hopefully get Stevie on for a show pretty soon. Thank you to everyone for listening to Extra for across the course of this season. It has been a privilege to be able to talk to you in what has been a roller coaster of a season. Thank you to our show sponsors, zenithcoins.com. Please head on over there to see some fantastic merchandise with them. Our executive producers, Mike Lee and Paul Myers. Most importantly, thank you to all of my guests who have come on Extra across the course of these weeks and months that have preceded this. But the main man himself, thank you very much for coming on this week, David.
Nah, a pleasure, mate. Thank you.
David, as I say, we'll be back on Monday, and I will also direct you on to our Patreon site, patreon.com/Heart and Hand, where you'll not only continue to hear all of the build-up for this weekend, but make sure that you log into that for all of your summer Rangers news as well. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. We hope you have a brilliant Saturday and Sunday. Bring that cup back to Ibrox, Rangers, and we'll speak to you all again very soon.